Story 1. Warburton Park. Curtis held on to an unfulfilled joy for exploring. The prospect of discovering new places always enthralled him, and often, whether he was just lazing around at home, slacking off during a lecture, or just hanging out on a sober night with his friends, he would often daydream of traveling the world to diverge himself in the vast cultures of many countries. Unfortunately, he was unemployed and was still living in his hometown after 21 years. Also, he came from a lower middle-class family who couldn't afford many luxuries, especially in this lousy economy, and after all the CVS he had set out and all the interviews he had stressed himself through, he just couldn't seem to get a full or part-time job. No matter what, he didn't have the resources to travel to places abroad. He couldn't even drive, so his options were limited even in his own local area. His impatience and unrest to break free from the small town to explore the world were rapidly beginning to catch up with him, so he did his best to satisfy this need by walking the dog. Every day he would go to pathways and nature walks he had never walked before, explore forests and lakes that were well out beyond civilization's way, and climb up steep hills in the countryside and gaze around at square miles of fields, forests, and hills. If he was walking the dog through his local neighborhood, he would even go into housing estates he had never been to before, just for a change of scenery, to see what the houses there looked like. He even had a peculiar habit of estimating the demographics of estates he visited based on the type of houses they lived in and the cars they drove. Today, he decided he would walk the dog by the nearby pond. Recently, he had been frequently going to a forest a few miles out, and he hadn't walked the dog by that lake for around a fortnight now. The surroundings of the forest were starting to become all too familiar to him now, and seeing as spring had just arrived, the scenery would not be changing any time soon. The thirst for a change of scene was really beginning to tickle his throat, so he grabbed the leash, strapped it onto Sylvester, who heard the sounds of the leash being removed from the drawer, and in his usual response, Essie ran eccentrically into the kitchen and headed out to the nearby pond on an unusually scorching April afternoon. He walked by the row of identical houses that he lived on, imagining taking breathtaking pictures of giant castles in Germany. After that, he walked through tufts of grass and straws of chickweed at the rusty, abandoned railway road, dreaming of drinking bourbon in a red barn with people he just met in one of the rural states of the USA. Finally, before he crossed the road to the park where the pond was, he envisioned touring through the southern French countryside, embracing the sweet smells of France's wine country. He envisioned relaxing to the sound of oars splashing the water while slowly sailing through the rippling canals of Venice. And he envisioned Ned gazing up at the empowering pyramids of ancient Egypt with the desert sun roasting his milk-pale skin and bleaching his brown curly hair. Yet when he reached the lake, it only made him depressed that he would most likely not be visiting these countries any time soon, and frustrated at the fact that after all the painstaking job searching he had done, that he was still unemployed and lacked the resources to satisfy his travel-hungry mind. Trying to ignore his annoyance and to just enjoy the beautiful sunny day, he approached the section of the path which started down a short but steep hill and which diverged into a left path and a right path in the shape of a bident. From here he could gaze at the rippling pond, sapphire in the flourishing sun, at the flat plains which surrounded it, deceivingly emerald on this bright April, and at the fancy new private hospital which had only been recently built. Looking at the colorful, sharp design of the hospital, his attention caught the entrance to a small housing estate that was located right beside it. It was not that Curtis had never noticed this housing estate before. He had just never thought to journey into it. Walking by it all these months, he had only ever noticed two things about it. He had always seen its large green area just past the entrance, which had a single sycamore tree sprouting out from the mid-DLE, and the center road, which all other lanes in the estate emerged from like branches from that tree. The main road of the estate had also been a hill, although its steepness had been rather more subtle than the sharp drop of the hill which he was standing on right now. Curtis wondered whether the houses all looked different, or if they all looked the same. Perhaps there were sections to this estate where the houses all looked the same in their own individual section, but the designs of these housing sections were all unique. He wondered what brand of cars the neighborhood and General -1, what their gardens looked like, and perhaps he could get to glance into the inside of their houses. Gathering all this information, he could try to guess what kind of people live in this estate. He yanked Sylvester's leash and trotted down the left path of the steep hill. He crossed a small stone bridge over one of the streams which fed into the pond, took the path around the large circular plain surrounding the pond, and started walking on the footpath beside the road. He continued walking until he was directly opposite of the entrance, waited for the two oncoming cars on either side of the road to pass, and jogged quickly across the road when the second car had driven by. Imitating Curtis, Sylvester sprinted ahead of him in a sudden burst of excitement. Warburton Park was etched into a sparkling, light gray boulder in all capitals, which sat on a small patch of grass on the corner of the road. There were 3 houses on either side of the road at the entrance, and all 6 of them were small, white, 2-story houses. After the houses was a crossroads. Down both the left turn and right turn there were 7 medium-sized, 2-story, Redbury, CK houses on either side of the streets, totaling 34 houses at the entrance. The road continued on to a T-junction at the very back of the estate, and there the right street was about equal in length to the 2 streets at the entrance, and the left street was much longer than the rest of them. The houses on both these streets were nearly twice as big as the houses at the ranch. All houses were on one side, while the other side was a field separated by a line of old, large oak trees. They all had 2 main parts to them. One part was a white 2-story, while the her was a brown dormer bungalow. There were 4 of these houses on the right street, and another 10 down on the left street. Before that, there were 2 green areas between the crossroads and the houses at the T-junction. One was the clean-kept, well-maintained green area, with the large sycamore tree spurting out from the middle that Curtis had always seen, whereas the other was a shaggy, overgrown green area with a swing set and a slide, surrounded by 3 gray concrete walls. Curtis had never noticed this area before. Despite all the times he had walked by this estate, while Curtis was walking down the street observing the 10 large white and brown houses, something odd occurred to him. As nice as this estate was, it was eerily quiet, and from what he had seen so of Hayar, it was totally deserted. Of course, there was nothing wrong with these quiet estates. In fact, if Curtis had noticed groups of hyper children playing around here, he would more likely have shied away from coming here in the first place. However, Curtis had not seen a single soul. No children out playing around the sycamore tree or on the swings. No middle-aged people sitting on their sofas, watching television, or even any senior citizens out gardening, basking in the glorious sunshine. The quiet wasn't just attributed by the absence of people out and about, though. Curtis couldn't even hear any cars driving on the main road he had crossed to get here, or on the road which he knew was beyond the fields and rows of tall oak trees. He didn't hear the trees sway in the wind, or even hear any birds tweeting. All he could hear was his own footsteps and the ringing of Sylvester's collar as he trotted alongside him. Curtis reached the end of the cul-de-sac, turned around, and I'd to have a look at the 4 houses down at the other side of the estate. While walking, he looked up at the trees, swaying silently in the brisk spring wind. He noticed that gray clouds were beginning to quickly accumulate from what he guessed was a west-southwest direction. He checked the time on his phone. It was 15:30 exactly. He decided that he had enough time to have a look around the remaining streets of the housing estate before making his way back home before 4 o'clock. When Curtis reached the top of the right street, it looked as if the 4 houses were exactly the same as the 10 he had just observed. This street was slightly curved, however, so he continued walking just to make sure that he wasn't going to miss anything. Slowly, the hidden remnants of the last 2 houses emerged from behind the front 2 houses, and to his disappointment, Curtis found that they were in fact just the same as all 12 other houses at the back of this estate. This anticlimax, however, was short-lived, as almost immediately Curtis had noticed a sharp right turn just after the last house. Quickening his pace, he observed that this newfound section was identical to the 2 streets of 2-story red brick houses at the entrance of the estate. Curtis looked back at his phone. 15:41. He walked forward, looking at the Volvo parked in the driveway of the first house on the right, and was then halted unexpectedly, dazed for a very brief moment. He turned around to find Sylvester sitting down, all 4 of his paws pressed into the concrete. Curtis jerked on the leash twice more, urging Sylvester to walk on with him. "Come on, boy, come on, Silver, come on." Sylvester continued to sit stubbornly, staring solemnly at Curtis with those wide, watery brown eyes. Curtis stared at him, defeated. Had Sylvester been a Chihuahua, a Jack Russell, or even a King Charles, he could have dragged him down the steamer easily enough, but he was a well-fed, sturdy Weimaraner who Curtis knew would have put up a tough fight. Curtis whipped the leash up in the air feebly, then Sylvester sprang to a seat, and with his ears pricked, and followed Curtis away from the street of the hidden 14 houses. Curtis led Sylvester to what looked like a young ash tree growing amidst the old, looming oak trees. He tied the leash around it, and bent down to rub Sylvester reassuringly. Sylvester tried to lick at his face and sprang at Curtis as he walked down the street away from him, but was jerked back by the tight knot which secured him to the tree. Trying his best to avoid the guilt from Sylvester's puppy eyes, Curtis walked along the middle of the road, glancing at all the red brick houses. Without looking back, all houses appeared in good condition on the outside, although a few had messy, unkempt gardens. Curtis counted 6 of these gardens, 5 of which had at least 1 children. Esto recklessly skewed about somewhere. It reminded Curtis of the discomforting, empty, overgrown green area with the cheap slide hen swing set near the entrance of the estate. The remaining gardens had their edges and corners blemished with haphazard bunches of flowers, their colors vividly clashing, yet relievingly soothing to the eye. Their lawns were flatly even and fresh spring green, and 1 or 2 had a few rust-colored tiles, matching their red brick house, dust as a cherry on the icing. Curtis reached the end of the cul-de-sac, marked by a mossy, gray concrete wall, with long green grass at its bottom corner that towered at what Curtis assumed was at least 15 feet tall. Following it up to the top, Curtis noticed that the sky was completely overcast with thick, light, gray altostratus clouds. Fearing the small risk of rain, Curtis decided it was best to head home straight after this, also deciding to observe the types of cars on his way out, looking around at a few Volkswagens and Hondas, and remembering that one Volvo at the very first house on the right, which was now the very last on the left. Curtis looked for the car at the house directly opposing, NG that one. While doing so, the same eerie thought from before struck him from out of nowhere. While it was weird enough to have absolutely no human activity on one stretch of housing in this estate, it was getting all too unnerving now for him that there were no people on this street either. Again, there were no children playing, elderly gardening, and not even anyone sitting in their front room. From what Curtis could remember, while approaching the left turn back onto the street at the back of the estate, Curtis noticed something stark that made him halt and recoil in SW. If panic Sylvester was gone, Kurt's muscles intensified. He was breathing heavily, immediately sprinting, profusely panicking and cursing himself for leaving the dog all by himself. "Silver, here, boy, come here, Silver," he said loudly and desperately while running at a sharp pace. He whistled 3 times and loudly called for him again. "Here, Silver, 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 Simon." Boy, he was approaching the turn when he began to shout for him, straining the muscles in his dry throat. "Silver, Silver, Sil." His shouting was brought to a halt as sudden confusion ashed away Kurt's fretting. He should have been running on the road between the oak trees and the large brown and white houses. However, unease was tingling down Kurt's spine as he looked around at the red brick houses standing only a few feet away from the tall, mossy, gray concrete wall which marked the end of the street he had just turned away from. Curtis was anxious, wondering how he had just unexpectedly hallucinated or daydreamed that whole fiasco. But as he looked back up to the top of the street, Curtis saw once more that Sylvester was nowhere to be found. Curtis sprinted again, his thoughts a little more collected and his worries pushed aside briefly. As he approached the turn for the second time, Curtis noticed that the leash was also missing, signaling to him that someone had on Sylvester and took. He looked around at the red brick houses, standing only a few feet away from the tall, mossy, gray concrete wall which marked the end of the street he had just turned away from. Curtis was frightened. He had definitely not hallucinated that. If I had, why would I be panting so much? He thought to himself. He sprinted once more, faster than the preview. As to times, he was fatigued, but he kept himself motivated by that thrive to break free from the seemingly infinite maze. He was thinking to himself again, perhaps if I just tried a glimpse at the white paint of the house around the coal. He looked around at the red brick houses, standing only a few feet away from the tall, mossy, gray concrete wall which marked the end of the street he had just turned away from. He was dreaming. He trembled fiercely and glanced around frantically, feeling like he was going to go blind if he stared at one thing for more than 3 seconds. His energy was absent from all the running, but he kept walking, doing so rapidly, all swirling his vision around in circles, his only motivation fear and despair. The ash tree that Sylvester was tied to jumped back. Can lurched toward him every few seconds, like his rapidly beating pulse. His shaky legs attempted to pick up a jog once more, trying to glimpse for one of the white houses again. He read intensely through any gaps, blotches appearing quickly in his central vision, while his outer vision blurred. When he couldn't find even a hint of white housing in any gap anywhere on this street, Curtis clutched his head into his hand, flailing his legs into a chaotic run towards the left turn, only hanging on to a thread of hope. He looked around at the red brick houses, standing only a few feet away from the tall, mossy, gray concrete wall which marked the end of the street he had just turned away from. Curtis lay down on the cold concrete in the shape of a fetus, burying his face into the warm, dark depths of his palms, his emotions latent on his pale, blank face apart from the wordless tears which gushed from his hazel eyes. He unintentionally scratched his brown curly hair against the harsh surface of the road, refusing to look at any of his surroundings. Curtis was surrounded by unchanging scenery and total, maddening silence. There was not a single soul to share or polarize his never-ending suffering. Hundreds of dead arms slowly materialized from beneath the nucleated evergreen trees where Curtis had submerged himself into rotting flesh, crusty and glistening, the color of mixed pale gray and deep blue, from all floors on the houses. Behind the numerous windows in all the large white and brown houses, bodies of pale gray and faces of deep blue, with large circular black eyes, thin, stitched lips, and noseless faces, scratched softly at the window, sometimes drumming all 5 fingers on glass. You couldn't hear the sound, but the vibration left an echo in your chest, an echo so dense it was like a protected kick from a startled horse. Their vacant eyes spoke the messages that the muscles of their stitched mouths struggled to. Sylvester snarled at the slow-moving arms and barked viciously at the dead-eyed children emerging from the sewer. Sylvester whined for Curtis to return, and with every passing minute, the sky turned an even deeper orange. Sylvester pulled full force away from the black, dying tree. Each leaf that fell onto his back was scorching him. The deceased children swayed from side to side, slowly moving in on helpless Sylvester. Not a sound could be heard from anywhere, as Sylvester violently shook the leash which had bound him. Sylvester snarled and barked viciously once more, in a futile effort to intimidate the motionless, dead children still swaying slowly toward him. Sylvester turned away from them and then towards the tree. He walked backwards until the leash was at its very most strain. Then he shook his head rapidly from side to side, tightening the grip of all four paws that were submerged into the muck. Slowly the leash began to slide over his neck, the nylon scraping painfully at the back of his ears. The bowl in his throat became rapidly swollen as he struggled to breathe with the collar wrapped so tightly around it. The heavy friction made the collar slip past his ears extremely slowly, awfully anxious about the emotionless, dead children swaying toward him painfully slowly. His vision blurred when his head jerked back violently and when the air flooded back into his lungs. The moment he released himself, a pale gray arm swung toward him, and their rust-colored, razor-sharp nails dug past his thin silver coat and into the soft, tender flesh just above his hip. Sylvester yelped, then snarled and barked mercilessly at the noseless, stitched mouth. Voidai, dead child, sinky, his teeth into their ice-cold flesh. The child stalled and pulled away, with just enough time for Sylvester to dash away from them. He galloped left down the subtly steep hill. The orange sky swirled like a gyroscope right above him, but Sylvester never looked back once. He galloped towards the entrance, where a slit of light shone blindingly bright in the dead center. Surrounding the blinding light was nothing but total darkness. The pale gray, deep blue bodies of men, women, and children hung gloomy and still from the thickest branch of the withering black, dying sycamore tree. Sylvester stopped to snarl and bark at the dissolving children sitting on the swings, and the eyeless men and women drumming their fingers on the windows from the small white house. As at the entrance, Sylvester continued running and running and running towards the blindingly bright light, until it was that was all he could see. At that moment, the entire world seemed to shift entirely onto one side, while Sylvester could see nothing but blindingly bright lights, hear absolutely nothing, and floated in the air, feeling gravity pull him to the left. Sylvester landed onto his side, a sharp pain throbbing just above his hip, and a dull burning sensation all over his back. He barked a few times while his vision spun around dizzily in his mind. A few seconds later, after he rubbed at his eyes with both his front paws, Sylvester looked around him curiously, retting his teeth to snarl. Families of smiling adults and playful children were walking around the lakes, with their noses and eyes intact and their mouths unstitched. Cars were driving on the roads, and the sounds of birds tweeting and ducks quacking still echoed through the beautiful, sunny April afternoon. Sylvester loosened his jaw and started to pant. All that was missing was Curtis. Story 2. Evangela raised herself slowly from her bed, still covered in heavy blankets, after a sudden, excruciating pain in her head disturbed her from her deep sleep. She knew exactly what this meant. She flicked and her light, the bright glow flooded her room instantly, overwhelming her wide pupils. The throbbing pain in her head just above her right ear intensified for a few seconds before soothing again. When her eyes adjusted to the light, she flicked open the small box on her bedside locker and started searching through the numerous keys she owned. She ran her fingers through the box, the ringing of clashing brass mingling with the high-pitched drumming of brass on wood. When she couldn't find it, she grabbed her glasses from the windowsill in her room and dumped all the keys onto her head. She separated all the gold keys from the silver keys and observed the latter pile for what she needed. The sharp pain suddenly became blinding for a brief moment, and then a flashback flickered in age. A mind? She remembered now. She walked over to the mannequin chest on the stand in the corner of the room, with the silver key glimmering from the light right between the two milk-white biceps, and she reached out and let the cold chain around its neck slither onto her fingers. She rubbed the tip of her thumb around the bow of the key, feeling the anguish of the 100 faces that were carefully crafted into it. After that, she slid her thumb across the thousands of tiny points on the blade. The blades were sharper than swords, but her thumb bled only a painless thin tendril. She smiled. The 100 faces drank her blood as she pulled open her wardrobe, and she almost instantly spotted the small chest sitting in the shadowed corner, the pain on the side of her head dull, slightly as she swept her left hand across the left wall of the smooth, brown-wooded chest. Again she rubbed the anguished faces, only this time it was on the lid of the box with her old hand, and there were at least 1,000 of them. She carried the box from her wardrobe to her bed, keeping the key pressed between her baby finger and the chest. She pressed her bleeding thumb in to the keyhole and edged over to flick the light back off. Further relief found her throbbing head as she was surrounded in peaceful darkness once again. She edged back to the bed, crawling like a crab, and grabbed the key with her left hand. She kept her bleeding thumb pressed into the keyhole, from where she could now feel the irritation of a low-power suctioning. Slowly, she slid the key into the keyhole, gradually taking her thumb away as the ice-cold brass slid against her soft, pale skin. She stretched out her entire left hand until it was strained and sprawled it out. In the lid of the box, the key turned easily as usual and was followed by the sound of a little metal click, echoing in the small, empty box like it was a long, empty hallway. Evangela opened the box, gazing into the black, empty chest. The pain on the side of Evangela's head worsened once more. The pain then spread to her temple and through the back of her head, and continued through her forehead and up her vertex, like sharp, twisting roots of a tree growing expeditiously into the wrinkles of her brain. She had tried her very best to keep still, but after all the times she had gone through this ritual, she had continuously failed to do so because she was unaware that she kept slowly swaying her head from side to side, trying to keep herself from collapsing. Sweat bulged from every pore on Evangela's forehead and slowly trickled down her face, like the blood of Jesus Christ with the crown of thorns on his head. Her throat became desert dry, and a queasy ball started heating up in the pit of her stomach. She could feel the room swirl around her, and she felt like a small speck of dust uncontrollably, but slowly, drifting through a wide V. With her last ounce of remaining strength, she managed to control her inevitable loss of consciousness by sitting on the bed. Sweat still dripped from her forehead like a waterfall and gathered in her hair like a mop. She felt like she was fully clothed in a sauna. She lay down, and her eyes gently rolled into the back of her head before her whole body suddenly erupted into a violent ENT seizure, flailing about uncontrollably. Now unaware of her concerning state, Evangela's sickness faded away, and her pain began to numb. Her whole body soothingly flew through a colorful endless tunnel. Her only sense was touch. Sometimes the portal to the other world felt like morphine to her. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. He could have been curled up in that fetal positi on for hours, days, weeks, or even months. It could have been any length of time. It could have been any length of time, but Curtis just didn't care. With his head buried in his palms, all that surrounded him was black. That was perfect, a blank canvas. Sometimes he would see those floating patches of colors. Those were even better. He could turn them into anything he wanted and do whatever he said with whatever he had turned them into. He could imagine anything he wanted to. He could travel to any place he wanted to go and be friends with whomever he pleased to be friends wire. If happiness would ever find him again, this was the only place it would search. Curtis thought of it as a bubble. Everything outside of the bubble was simply hell as far as he was concerned. Curtis was certain of this. Back home, he thought that being stuck in the same town for years with no escape in near sight was so crushing. But this he could not even bear witness to. It was time for a change of scenery. Curtis removed his buried head out from his palms and looked around him. Expectantly, he winced at the sight that nothing had changed at all, not even a little bit. He looked around again. The weather hadn't even changed. He wasn't hungry, thirsty, and he had physically felt the exact same way as he had the day he had become trapped here. If it even was the same day, if the weather could stay the same for hours upon hours on end, who knows what sort of bungled time pattern this place had. Curtis slowly got to feet, his legs shaking like hanging, drying clothes fluttering in a strong breeze. A recurring thought plagued him as he straightened his stance. He looked around at the red brick houses, standing only a few feet away from the tall, mossy, gray concrete wall which marked the end of the street he had just turned away from. Anxiety swept over Curtis. Old habits returned anew, and his eyes about rapidly glancing around so as to not glimpse at the same thing. Twice, Curtis controlled himself and staggered unusually quickly toward the nearest red brick house to his left. He stumbled between the silver Toyota Yaris and the well-kept, healthy front garden. Curtis gazed through the sitting room window. Still desolate like all the other houses on this street, Curtis placed his hand on the cold plastic door handle, and to what was like the first bit of glimmering happiness that he had ever felt in his whole miserable life, it was unlocked. He entered the house, asterisk, 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 asterisk. The first thing Evangela did when she had arrived into the other world was trace the lines of her scar where her throbbing pain had awoken her. This was the life she had chosen, and whenever a being had accidentally ventured from their world to the other, it was her duty to fix that. This was her responsibility, her calling in life, just like it had been for her mother, and her mother, and her mother, and her mother, and so on. This world was parallel to her world. Everything and everyone coexisted. In both worlds, people did the exact same things, Events followed their exact chronology, and it all happened on the exact same time scale. The only difference between the two worlds was with the spirits of the deceased. They populated both worlds, but it was only in this world that you could actually see them. Each spirit was individually microscopic, but they traveled in hordes of thousands, millions, and even billions. There were for select different colors, none of which technically existed back in her world, each representing a different density of spirits in one given place. The only color that existed in both worlds was black, and that was only used here to identify the outlines of physical entities. Evangela took her first steps through the floating groups of spirits, watching the black outlines of grass and leaves sway in the brisk breeze. She looked over to the pond, the black outlines of ripples floating peacefully towards the black outlined shore of long grass and chickweeds. Evangela continued walking until she was on the footpath, the black outlines of people walking straight past her, blissfully unaware of her presence. The color representing the thickest density of spirits buzzed around their outlines. Immediately, something amiss had caught her eye, a color from her universe which shouldn't exist here, a color that wasn't black. Evangela looked directly towards a housing estate and immediately spotted juxtaposition. Without her glasses, she couldn't see what it was, but it was gray, definitely gray. Evangela walked across the road, the black outline of a car driving right through her like she was air. Evangela got closer, and whatever it was jerked its head up and looked straight at her. She was taken aback. Nothing had ever noticed her before. She took one step closer and squinted her eyes. A dog. She approached with caution, noticing 3 deep, pulsating cuts on the dog's lower back. Different colors of spirit density rose quickly from each wound like thin, wispy smoke, quickly transforming into different density colors and evaporating into larger groups of colors into the air. The dog continued to pant and stare at her as she kneeled down and placed her hand gently on the top of his head. She focused all her energy on the dog and on her hand and felt the heat quickly gather in her fingertips. Thousands of thoughts swarmed right into her head like tiny flies swarming above cut grass on a hot spring dusk. She tried to tabulate the thousands of trafficking thoughts. The dog's name. He is Sylvester. His owner, Curtis, was looking around Warburton Park when he accidentally transitioned into the other world and became lost. The dog was tied to the tree. The malignant spirits approached and attacked Sylvester. He escaped, and he is the only existing entity that can see me in this world. Curtis called Sylvester Silver for short. Sylvester doesn't know where Curtis has gone. Sylvester doesn't know who or what attacked him. Sylvester doesn't know who I am. Evangela took her hand away, closing her eyes tightly as the throbbing pain returned to her scar on. See more. Evangela looked at the dog again, who was now sitting down but still looking up at her and panting. Evangela smiled at him as he continued panting. She whistled at Sylvester, and to her joy, he followed her into Warburton Park. Story 3. Freak next door. I live next to this one kid who always had bandages wrapped around their whole head, even covering their face. I remembered his name was Wilbur, a 12-year-old boy who never left his house. He sometimes looked out of his bedroom window on the top floor at all of the kids who would play outside, while Wilbur sat and watched. I remembered his windows had metal bars on them, so there was no way he could climb out of his bedroom windows. We sometimes communicated to each other by writing to each other on pieces of paper. Since Wilbur can't hear me because the window was locked, Wilbur only does it when his parents aren't around, since they're weird. His mother and father were one of those parents that were insanely crazy about science and chemistry. According to Wilbur, they would stay in their basement and work all day and night, except at the times where they have to give Wilbur some food daily. Now they're not treating him like an animal. His parents were just very busy. They told Wilbur that he shouldn't go outside to make contact with anyone until his face got better. He, too, told me that he accidentally slipped on one of his parents' chemicals and fell face first, ruining his appearance. And his parents feared that he would be made fun of by the other kids in the neighborhood. I remember one time a couple of older kids were throwing rocks and pebbles at his windows, laughing and pointing at Wilbur as he looked down at them. He told me that they do it a few times, but he's used to it. But to me, he's a great guy, and still is today. I have never been inside his house, but he showed me some cool stuff he collected, like comic books. He had loads of them, from Marvel to DC to other known superhero comics. He was a huge superhero fan. He even said that he felt like a superhero, a normal human being who became affected by dangerous chemicals and then became a powerful superhero. He once wrote on a piece of paper and had it put up to his window as he pretended to be a superhero. I had a collection of action figures and video games that amazed Wilbur. He told me that he never played a single video game in his life, which was quite sad. He also told me that his babysitter took them away from him before he could play them and burnt them in front of him. Wilbur had a mean babysitter named Miss Fitzgerald, a tall, mean lady who never liked kids at all. This started before his face became messed up. He told me she was basically why kids' nightmare of all the things I heard she has done. Miss Fitzgerald had babysat many kids before, and trust me, it was not pretty. Wilbur told me that the last kid she babysat, a 4-year-old girl, she made her live through 7 hours of hell. Wilbur said that Miss Fitzgerald starved her and surrounded her bed with a few bear traps. And the worst thing that happened, the parents didn't yet know about her deed. She would lie to them just to get paid. All those things I've heard. She is a foul, cruel woman with no soul at all. And now she had to babysit this our guy. Wilbur was old enough to make his own decisions, except for some, but his parents apparently hired an evil witch. The parents had to go to Texas to a scientist convention, so Wilbur was left all one with her. One time, I was writing about her too, showed to him. But then I saw Miss Fitzgerald forcefully pulling him away from the window, and that was the rest of my day without talking to him. The next day, when I looked through my window to see Wilbur, I saw someone lying down on his bed. Looking at the person's wrapped head, I banged my fist on the window, trying to get Wilbur's attention. He slowly sat up on his bed, wiping away tears from his eyes. He seemed to be crying, which gave me a thought. I had a worried look on my face as I saw bruises all over his arms and legs, a faded dark tone of purple. He went to write something down on a piece of paper. Then, as Wilbur finished writing, he went up to the window and pressed the note on the glass. What he wrote had terrified me. The whole situation still burnt in the back of my mind, something I knew I would never forget. He wrote, "Help me." What made it worse was that his handwriting was scribbled onto the paper and was almost illegible. Wilbur kept banging on the window with his other hand. Then suddenly I saw someone else run into his bedroom next to him. It was her. She had something in both of her big, chubby hands. In one hand was a lemon, and in the other was a pair of scissors. What Miss Fitzgerald did terrified me even more. Miss Fitzgerald ran up to Wilbur, grabbing his head, holding it still. I saw him screaming in pain and fear, so I knew I had to do something. At the same time, I couldn't stop watching. She used her scissors to cut open the bandages and unwrap them off his head and threw them to the side. What I saw almost made me vomit, something that sickened me. I was utterly shocked at looking at Wilbur's real, deformed face. His whole head was completely covered by bandages, and what was underneath, I knew the purpose, too. I saw his face, almost melted off, showing a dark red layer underneath. I could only imagine his face looking like melted cheese on a cheeseburger. Wilbur's whole face, even one of his eyeballs, were burnt a bit. The chemicals had messed him up badly. Miss Fitzgerald sliced the lemon in half with the scissors, pinning Wilbur down on his bed. Then she threw the scissors to the side, next to the bandages, and held his head still with one hand. With the other hand, she squeezed a lemon slice onto Wilbur's head, into his eyes, into the red layer of his face. The painful expression on his face, his loud, muffled screams, his face stinging from the acid of the lemon ice. She used the other lemon to squeeze onto his face, again torturing Wilbur with extreme pain. I decided to bang my fist on my window, which was a bad idea. Miss Fitzgerald looked over to the bedroom window, right at me. I jumped back. She noticed Emmy. She ran back out of the bedroom, shoving Wilbur down as he screamed in pain and agony. I knew what she was going to do, so I ran out of my bedroom and ran downstairs. The good thing about this situation was that my parents don't know about Wilbur, and the fact that they were at work for a little while. I locked the front door, hoping that Miss Fitzgerald wouldn't burst into my house. I looked around for the house phone, but as I was, a loud bang rang my ears. I looked behind myself at the door, noticing her red, sweaty face and her curly blonde hair. By the looks in her eyes, I knew there was going to be some trouble. She kept banging at the door, nearly screaming her head off. As I looked around for the phone, I finally spotted it next to the couch on the coffee table. I ran towards it, dialing 911. As the sounds of Miss Fitzgerald's threatening screams were heard from outside. Waiting for a few rings, I finally hear the operator's voice, the usual greeting from a 911 operator. I started explaining the whole situation from beginning to end as quickly and clear as possible. They told me to wait patiently, as the police will arrive at my house soon. It took a few minutes for the police to arrive at my house. Not only did they arrive, but my parents arrived early from work as well. Apparently, why, they got a call from the police explaining my situation and decided to come home, my parents were extremely worried and frightened. They asked me more questions about it than the police did. I had to explain everything, from being friends with Wilbur to how his parents left him with an abusive babysitter to what she tried to do. About an hour later, a police officer came to me. He had something he wanted to tell me about the horrible atrocities that took place next door. The truth about the babysitter, the parents, and Wilbur was truly shocking based on the evidence they fool. And Wilbur's parents weren't his actual parents at all. They adopted Wilbur from an orphanage that's out of town, only to perform an experiment on him. It was the reason why they moved to Texas to hide the babysitter. Miss Fitzgerald was part of the experiment too. In fact, Wilbur wasn't the first kid to get adopted by the scientists. They had done illegal experiments on those orphans, and it was to find out how much pain a child can take before death based on the cause of death and the age of the child. 38 children between the ages of 2 and 13 were reported missing, and Wilbur was one of them. There were security cameras on the outside and the inside of the house. Right now, they arrested Miss Fitzgerald for child cruelty and the deaths of many children, and are on the case to find the two scientists, all of that. And I was friends with someone who would have been killed if I didn't call the police. Apparently, Wilbur also tried to lie about almost everything he told me. He was trying to protect himself. He was sent to a new trusted family, a married couple who lived out of town. Since then, I never saw him again until now, 20 years later. I went to a bar to get myself a few drinks by myself when a man approached me. Remember me? He said, that familiar man smiling at me. I smiled back, realizing how long it has been since I had last seen Wilbur. In fact, he looks like a nice, healthy man now without his bandages. He was a brown-haired man with sky-blue eyes. He almost looked like a complete stranger, and after that, we talked and drank a few glasses, finally speaking to each other in person. Wilbur and I knew that nobody would try to keep us apart. The scientists and the babysitter are probably locked away right now. After all, I still couldn't stop thinking of the fact that this man would have been killed if I didn't help save his life. Story 4, the gin. The video call connected, and my boyfriend smiled first. I love you and I miss you and I can't wait until you get home. I love you too, and I can't wait either. I peered at the computer screen. Where are you? I'm in the attic, Brody replied. When I put my archery equipment up here, I found something cool. He just purchased an old house in Houston and a quiet neighborhood that I hoped would someday be our neighborhood. We'd dated for 3 years now, and I thought he might propose after my college graduation this spring. Check this out. He led a dusty chest under the dangling light bulb so I could see the inscriptions. It looked Arabic. He opened it and pulled out a triangular-shaped amulet made of silver. It had the same markings. Next, a tiny, sliding box that contained bits of paper and wood, and some unidentifiable chunks. Smells like jasmine, he said, sniffing it. The next item was a drawstring bag. He opened it and poured the contents in his palm. Ooh. Toenail clippings. What the hell? The last 2 things in the chest were a tattered copy of the Koran and a box of glass balls or name. Hence, no, there's no place to put a hook or string. There are 3 clear ones, and this one. He held it up for inspection. It was nicotine yellow. I swear the ball lurched in his palm. It crashed to the floor and shattered. Something flashed like fire. Brody cursed. "What was that?" I cried. I don't know," he said, staring at something out of my line of sight. He cocked his head, listening. "Brody," he said. Then Danette. What? Danette was his mother's name? Brody looked blankly at the screen and said, "I have to go." Without another word, he ended the Skype call. I tried to call him back, and he didn't answer. He didn't answer that night. Finally, the next morning, he did. "I'm a little busy right now," he said, his voice heavy. "Are you okay?" "Why, yeah," he said, and ended the call. I heard nothing from him the next day, so I called his sister and asked her to check on him. She called back an hour later. Her voice was guarded when she said, Alia, I saw him. He looked a little rough. Look, have you guys been fighting?" "What? No." "He just looked at me when I told him you were worried. He was fine. Yesterday, we were making plans for Christmas break." Another hesitation. He almost acted stone. I've never known Brody to. He doesn't, ever. Well, just give him a why or two. Maybe he really is just busy with something. I'll let you know if I hear from him. But she didn't. I didn't either. He ignored my calls and texts. This was so unlike Brody. My stomach was in knots, and I don't know how I made it through finals. I thought about the strange things he'd found. It had to be connected. My grandmother was originally from Bangladesh and a Muslim. My father didn't practice NY religion, but I'd taken a class on Islamic traditions last semester. I loved the professor and dropped by her office the morning before my flight home. Alia, what a nice surprise. Her smile faded when I told her about Brody's find and that strange video call. She went to the shelf and picked up a book. Thumbing through the pages, she stopped and handed it to me. "Did the markings and amulet look like this?" "Yes." "What is this?" "We didn't discuss it much in class, but the Quran holds that there are 3 sapient creations of Allah: angels, humans, and jinn. The objects you describe were used by magicians to control and use jinns to do their bidding. Sometimes they trap these creatures in glass balls. A jinn." I laughed. "You mean a genie? The things you described are evil magic." "You said he repeated his mother's name?" "The legend is a magician needs 3 things from you to discuss you with the demons and name. Your mother's name and the trace, hair, nail clippings. You don't really believe in genies." She looked at me for a long moment, and then said, "I'm sending you an email with passages to read to ward off jinn possession when you see Brody. Why don't you just try it? And Alia, be careful." I laughed off her warning, but my heart felt heavy when I knocked on Brody's door that afternoon. He opened on the 3rd knock. His appearance shocked me. He looked tired and shaven. He stared at me as if I were a stranger. "Brody, what's going on?" Something flitted in the hallway behind him, like the aftermath of a camera flash. I swear for an instant I saw a woman made of flames. He glanced behind him, then back at me. "You should go." He shut the door in my face. I waited till nightfall and took the hidden key to let myself inside. The house was quiet as I crept through it, searching for him. When I peeked into his bedroom, I gasped. Brody lay prone on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The flame woman sat on top of him. Her head whipped around when she heard me, and she hissed, revealing a pair of inch-long fangs. I ran. Through the house, doors sounded like gunshots as they slammed. The front door wouldn't open. I screamed and jerked on it. She was coming. The attic ladder was down, so I lunged up the steps. I dug out my cell phone, trying frantically to open the email from my professor. Through the opening, Brody and the flame woman stared up at me. The door swung shut. "I've been here for an hour." I screamed the passages my instructor sent until both my voice and my cell battery died. Now I smell smoke. Story 5. When the circus came to town. The tents appeared in the middle of the night. With a preamble, there was some heated discussion at City Hall because not even the mayor knew they were coming. They must have worked out something, though, because the gypsy circus stayed. Our town wasn't big enough to support even a fair, so this was big news. That was how I found myself with my older brother Tommy and his friends that evening. I was just 15 then, and though we were in a small town now, my mother hailed from Boston, there was no way she would cut me loose to run around on my own. What if she'd known how bad Tommy and his friends really were? She would have known I was much better off alone. "How much money you got?" Frankie asked, bunching my shoulder. Of the 3 older boys, I hated him the most. He regularly hit, kicked, and ridiculed me, while my own brother laughed about it. He was twice my size. I was a runt back then, but I dreamed of the day I could stand up to him, stand up to them all. I gave the 20 Mom had given me, but not the 5 I had tucked in my hat. Bill, if nothing else, I wanted to sneak a candy apple later. Dad was a dentist, and we didn't have things like that around my house. They abandoned me when we walked inside that Midway. I'd never been to a circus before. There weren't many rides, but huge tents loomed everywhere. Barkers told us to come one, come all. See the magnificent beasts of the wild or the horrifying freaks of nature. I laughed at that one. I'd ridden in with the freaks of nature. Still, I wanted to see a lion. They looked so majestic on television. Reluctantly, I parted with $2 and stepped inside. The tent smelled of sawdust, sweat, and dung. But inside were the most fantastic creatures I'd ever seen. I picked a peanut off the grow and fed it to an elephant, then sat on a bench to wait. The show, the lions, were my favorite part. I knew they were big, but I never expected anything that huge. I held my breath when the lion tamed stuck his head in one creature's mouth. Its incisors looked as long as my fingers. Its back teeth, which I knew were called carnassials from a book my dad gave me, worked like scissors to cut and tear meat. No way would I ever have had the guts to stick my head in there. After the show, I debated spending another $2 to watch the same show again, but I really wanted that app. As I made my way to the food trailers, a girl called out to me, "Read your fortune for $1. The sight of her took my breath. For the rest of my life, I dream about her face. I wish that she could have seen her own fortune instead of mine that night. She didn't deserve what happened to her. I stared at her, transfixed. Her eyes were 2 different colors. I wondered if she wore contact lens to achieve the effect in order to look more striking. One was icy blue and the other brown, like mine. The effect was jarring, even more so because she was lovely. Long black hair, full lips, dressed like a genie from a TV show with her smooth, tan belly bared. Hormones trumped hunger, and I let her lead me into her tent. She took my palm and stretched it out in front of her. She talked for a while, giving me vague predictions. Then she gave me a long look and said, "You need to stand up for yourself. Do not let others control your fate." I always wondered about that later. If she really saw that, it proved to be good advice. I wish I'd heeded it. She walked me out after my reading, her hand tucked into my arm. "Well, what do we have here?" Frankie boomed. "The little monkey has a girlfriend." Her hand tightened on my arm, and then she smiled. "I'm taking a break." Frankie caught her arm as she tried to walk by, and Tommy and his friend James blocked her. I wanted to tell them to leave her alone, but my voice was a frog hung in my throat. "Hang on," Frankie said. "I got $1 I want." My fortune told, matter of fact. He leered at her. "What will a 10 get me?" To my horror, he grabbed her waist and pulled her against him. She struggled free and snarled something in a foreign language. Then he spat on his shoe. Frankie backhanded her, then dragged her into the tent. I turned to run, and James tripped me. I went sprawling into the dust, and my mouth filled with blood. James hauled me up, and I heard a click as he opened the switchblade he always carried. He pressed it against my back. "One move and I'll slice your spinal cord," he said. Nietzsche's end up in ditches. It only lasted a few minutes, but it seemed like an eternity. They brutalized that girl. I heard her struggle at first, then nothing. That nothing terrified me. I was crying, blood and snot hoking me. People walked right on by, and nobody seemed to notice something was wrong. Something was horrible. The newspaper said her father found her naked and beaten in that tent. It was today, before she could give the police a description. I was relieved when the police pulled up in front of our house. "Don't you say a word," Tommy hissed, "or I swear on my life I'll end you." I wish I could say that I spoke up, told the police everything. But I didn't. I thought her description would be enough, and the DNA. But I misjudged small-town politics. Frankie, Tommy, and James spun some story about the girl being a prostitute and soliciting them for money. They said she grew angry when they didn't have enough and threatened to cry rape if they didn't bring her money. They said another gypsy had beat her to make the story look real. The judge closed his briefcase and let them go. We walked outside together. I have never felt so sick, ashamed. Tommy and his friends stood beside me in their fresh suits and ties, looking like altar boys. An old gypsy woman approached. She muttered something, then made a sign in the air with her gnarled finger. Frankie stepped toward her, and James caught his arm. The girl sobbed against her father, her beautiful face still swollen and discolored. She whispered something to the old woman and pointed at me. The old woman's eyes narrowed, and she made another sign. "That's enough," my father said, and led us away. The circus disappeared, and within a week my brother and his Friday ends were dead. Tommy got his hand caught in the garbage disposal at the restaurant he worked after school. As it chewed his arm, they thought the pain was making him delusional because he was screaming about the lion's teeth. He bled out before the ambulance got there. James fell off a ladder while he was helping his father patch their roof. The fall severed his spinal cord. Frankie died the most horribly. Of all, he wrecked around Johnson's Bend one night, and his car caught on fire. Rescuers said they'd never forget his screams. I figured he's still screaming and burning in the place he went to. I dreamed about the old woman every night. She said, "Your crime is silence. You stood quietly and let evil reign. Thus sealed your fate." One morning, my tongue felt funny. When I peered in the mirror, it looked like a piece of bark was attached to it. It felt like bark, too. Mom was still in her room, so I didn't bother her. I somehow knew it was my time. I went to the woods behind our house. My steps grew heavier as I walked, and I could barely drag my feet through the leaves. When I looked down, my legs no longer looked human. They were forming into a tree trunk. Roots curled from my toes and spiked into the ground. I raised my hand to feel my tongue, and my arm froze there. Bark raced down it, falling in place like Legos connecting, covering what was Huma. And with no surprise, I saw the girl walk out of the woods. "I know it wasn't your fault," she said. I begged my Baba for mercy. She said, "You must learn a lesson. You will be a tree until you grow and mature enough to bear fruit. When the first apple falls from your tree, you will be human again. I hope you will always stand up for yourself and others." After that, it took 3 years, but I am still thankful for that lesson. Story 6, Mr. Smile. It was in early November of 1997. At a series of very strange sessions led a child psychologist in Maine to contact the authorities. It began when a patient of his began to tell him about one of their friends, this friend being imaginary as far as both the psychiatrist and the boy's parents were concerned. He called his friend Mr. Smile and would talk about him at great length during some sessions. The boy called him Mr. Smile both because he would always be smiling and because when he was around, the boy said everything felt happy. He said that there was a feeling of everything being okay. The boy in question was being treated for serious issues to do with anger and depression. But when Mr. Smile was around, he sighed that all the anger and the sadness seemed to just disappear. He said that Mr. Smile wouldn't speak, but rather just stand there at the foot of his bed. He smelled like candy floss, and just by being there he made the boy feel calm and safe. The psychiatrist assumed this imaginary friend was some sort of coping mechanism the boy had developed to deal with the problems at home that had led to his violent temper, and thought nothing much of it until another patient, a girl of about 9 years old, also began talking about her imaginary friend, Mr. Smile, and then a boy of 7, and then a boy of 12, and then a girl of 11. All in all, close to 15 separate patients all began to talk to him about Mr. Smile. The first few he'd put down to coincidence. After all, many children have imaginary friends, and the name and description of Mr. Smile were just generic enough that it didn't concern him too much at first. But as more and more of his patients told him about Mr. Smile, he began to grow concerned. He asked for more details. Not every single one of them described him the same way, using the exact same words. Now there was no way that all of these children could be in contact with each other. 5 of them, for instance, were currently being homeschooled, and according to their parents, when he spoke to them, never really even left the house. except when it was to accompany them on shopping, trips, and the like. There was no way that every single one of these kids could have rehearsed or prepared their statements together, which led him to a deeply disturbing conclusion. He spoke privately with each of the children's parents one at a time. He avoided disclosing too much information, but told them that something troubling had cropped up in multiple sessions with various patients, and that he believed that there was a chance their child was at risk. He asked for their permission to discuss matters with the authorities, and the parents gave their consent, provided they were kept in the loop as to what was going on. And so, over the course of the next week, the police came and talked to the children about their friend. They asked for details about his appearance, which they couldn't seem to describe apart from the smile, and that he was not like them, how he got into their house, anything he said or did while he was there, because by this point the psychiatrist, the parents, and the police were all convinced that Mr. Smile was quite real and quite dangerous. The authorities had checked to make sure there were no known predators living in the area, which they had confirmed was not the case. But it was quite clear that whoever this Mr. Smile was, he was a real person who would be sneaking into the homes of these children at night. None of the children claimed to know how he got in. They said they would just wake up and he'd be there at the foot of their bed. Summity. Means they said he would be singing something, but not in English. It sounded like a lullaby, they said. It made them feel safe. Finally, the children were asked to draw Mr. Smile, as they couldn't to put into words how he looked. Each and every one of the children picked up a red crayon and proceeded to color in the entire page until it was just a rectangle of red. When asked about this, they insisted that they had drawn Mr. Smile. When asked where his head, arms, and legs were, they would insist that they had drawn those. They claimed that they had drawn a perfect picture of the man at the foot of their bed, and when they were told that they had simply colored in the page and not drawn anything at all, they became deeply angry, feeling that they were being accused of lying and insisting that what they had drawn was a picture of the man they had seen, acting more on a hunch than anything else. The psychiatrist decided to show one of the colored and rectangles to the various children and to ask them what it was. Each and every one of them, with no knowledge of what the picture was supposed to be or who had drawn it, and with no knowledge that the other children that had been spoken to about this subject even existed, replied that it was a picture of Mr. Smile. Cameras and baby monitors were placed in the children's room so that they could be monitored. Many of the parents simply stopped sleeping altogether, staying up all night staring at the screens that displayed where their children slept. At no point did anyone enter or exit the bedrooms. No sounds, except for them snoring or occasionally talking in their sleep, were heard over the baby monitors. There was no sign of Mr. Smile. After almost 2 weeks of this, many of them began to doubt that Mr. Smile had ever existed. Other psychiatrists since have put the whole thing down to some strange shared delusion that, while it couldn't be explained yet, did not have any basis in reality. Some suggested that maybe this whole Mr. Smile thing had its basis in a TV show or film that the children had all watched, leading them all to dream up something similar. Then one of the boys went missing. The camera in his room had gone dead at around 2 in the morning. His mother had run to check in on him only to find his room empty. It had literally taken her less than a minute to run to his room. There was no possible way for him to leave or be taken and be out of her sight in the time it took her to leave her bedroom and run towards his, but he was gone. She said there was a smell like cotton candy in the room. The search for the boy turned up nothing. No one had seen anything strange or unusual around the home before or during the disappearance, and no trace of him was ever found. It was less than a week later that one of the girls who had spoken of Mr. Smile vanished as well. Then another of the boys. One by one each of them began to disappear until only 4 remained. The 4 remaining children began to talk about how Mr. Smile and his friends were going to take them away soon. When asked about these friends, they talked about how Mr. Smile lived with the other smiling men in the happy place, and that he would take them there soon. They said that there were lots of people there already, and that in the happy place everything was beautiful. They said that they knew about it because Mr. Smile talked to them in their heads because he couldn't talk like other people did, and that he would show them pictures in their heads of the place they were going. Things began to get increasingly disturbing. After a few weeks, the children began complaining of headaches and nausea. Their schools reported that they had begun to suffer hallucinations, and 2 of them started complaining that they didn't like the place that Mr. Smile was showing them anymore. One began screaming for half an hour, acting as if they were having a fit, and screaming for the colors to stop, that the colors were horrible, and that they needed them to go away. One of the children claimed that Mr. Smile was talking to them in their head all the time now, and was telling them things, terrible things, but that they couldn't talk about it, that they mustn't because then their parents would know about the terrible things too. The psychiatrist asked them to write down what Mr. Smile was saying, promising that he would show it to no one. Managing to gain the trust of one of the boys enough that he agreed. The contents of the book are known only to him and the authorities, but whenever anyone involved has been asked about it, they just get real quiet and quickly find an excuse to change the subject. The children stopped, head sleeping. Footage from the security cameras showed them sitting bolt upright, their eyes unblinking, just staring at the wall, without moving or making a sound. Sedatives did nothing. One of the girls began cutting strange circular marks into her skin, while 2 of the boys ceased communicating in English altogether. The language they spoke was never identified, and despite numerous people being asked to listen to them, they could not translate what they were saying. By the start of 1999, all 4 of the children had vanished into thin air. There was no trace of who took them. Searches have turned up nothing to this day, with no indication of where they are or if they're even dead or alive. No suspects have ever been found either. All 4 of them appeared to simply vanish into thin air, much like the others, all of whom also remain missing. Their disappearances unexplained. Story 7. It wasn't a reindeer. Christ, I muttered to myself as the first flakes of snow started to fall. They gathered in fuzzy clumps over the windshield before my wipers cleared them away. I'd been waiting for 20 minutes now in my sister's driveway. Had I chosen to wait inside with her, I'd have been dead by now, thanks to her gray cats. Cute little devils, but murder to my sinuses, puffy eyes, and a clogged-up throat. That's just what I needed every Christmas. Our family made the annual trip to my grandparents' cabin tucked away in the woods of Hope, Alaska, and I'd hoped to beat the heavy snowfall that was forecasted since my sister's license was suspended from a DUI. Here I was, a hostage to time, with my finger tapping anxiously on the steering wheel, when my mother had asked me to be the one to grab my sister. I had honestly dreaded it. From the start, it wasn't that we hated one another. We just weren't as close anymore. After decades of constant arguments and our disagreements, we became distant and our relationship fizzled. Yes, we were siblings, but it felt more accurate to call us the residue of what siblings once were. Finally, like the gates of Valhalla, her front door opened, and out she came. Her hair was forest green. The last time I'd seen her, it had been white. The time before that, it was violet. Got everything? I asked as she clambered her way into the passenger seat. She responded as she adjusted her glasses and stuffed a few bags in the back seat. And just like that, we were off. Hope was about a 30 a new drive, and it didn't take long for the awkward silence to inflate between us. It didn't help that the radio didn't work in my car, and that the broken auxiliary port made your music sound like it was having a seizure. By the time we reached the turnoff for Hope Highway, the road was turning into a thick white sheet. Thankfully, on Christmas Eve night, the long stretch to Hope's small community was quick and vacant. The cabin was tucked away in a fortress of trees 5 miles off the main road. As I made the turn, my sister cracked the window, pulled out a blunt, and lit it with her lighter. "Want a hit?" she asked. "Snow crunch beneath us." "Not while I'm driving. It's a straight path. We're practically there already." She took a drag and blew it out the window. "I want to just focus on this." "All right." She huffed and pushed up her glasses. "If you're that worried, maybe slow down a bit." Then there was the jab, a piece of bait to lure me into another fight. But I wasn't going to bite. Not this time. She could live with us getting there faster. The drive was almost over, and soon I'd be in a warm living room with my feet up, a spiked eggnog in my hand, and Bobby Helms' Jingle Bell rock in the air. I could already hear Uncle Jed spouting off one of his crude jokes. "Why does Santa Claus have such a big do-to?" My sister shrieked, jabbing a finger in my side and whipping my mind back to the windshield. The car had just finished winding around the thick trail. The large body of a reindeer stood in our path, eyes wide open and blank. He didn't move as the high beams found it. Snap into a panic, I twisted the wheels in a desperate swerve. The car veered greasily to the side in a fine spray of slush. The reindeer, also known as a caribou, remained still, even as the bumper soared inches from its nose. We came to a crunching halt off the main path. Jesus, I sighed, blessed with relief. "Did we hit it?" "No," my sister said, leaning out the window to check, while exhaling another plume of smoke. I wound the steering wheel back around and pressed on the gas. The wheels shrilled in place, kicking up globs of sleet, but not moving an inch. Perfect. I moaned and unfolded myself from the seat to check it out. The 2 front tires were caked in black slush and practically swallowed in a mound of snow. I kicked at it, trying to clear off the icy debris from the treads and beneath the wheel well. When that tired me out, I resorted to scraping it off with my fingers. Screw off, Prasser, I heard my sister call. Toward the dark silhouette of the reindeer, its antlers like gnarled fingers reaching for the treetops. Then she made a sort of startled yip. Foul. Load by, what the fuck? I looked up from the scrim of snow. The reindeer was now standing tall on both of its hind legs. It looked strange, like a silly caricature you'd see in a kid's book. But out there, in the silence of the woods, it was a creepy image, the way its vague shape stood on just two legs held an almost human-like balance. For whatever reason, I realized then, it didn't have a tail. Its muscular neck craned to the side and let out an ululating scream, a miserable squeal of metal grinding against metal. My legs were ice sculptures, cementing me to the spot as the shriek quieted to a succession of wet grunts. The reindeer dropped down to its original posture and stopped heavily. Puffs of white vapor and strings of snot vented from its nostrils. I was no hunter, but it didn't take a lot to tell when a pissed-off animal was about to charge. I leapt for the driver's seat, pulled the door open, and slammed it shut just as the muffled thud of hooves reached me. Antlers scraped the door as its large body practically flew over the patch I had just been standing in. Fast, very fast, my sister screamed as the large bulk of its fame wound CK around and charged again, this time shattering the headlights and submerging us in darkness. Just go already, my sister hollered in my ear. I'm trying. God damn it, I hissed. The wheels continued to spin helplessly. We were trapped. The creature charged again, this time nailing the window. A cobweb of cracks bloomed near my sister's head. I searched for anything, literally anything, that I could use as a weapon. I was never really a gun enthusiast, but at that moment I'd have shaved my head and joined the secular monks if it meant having a clock in my hand right then and there. After rattling the car once more, the reindeer finally appeared to lose interest and disappeared amidst the cluster of trees. Granted some time to breathe and think, we phoned our dad and told him about the situation. He was going to come down in his pickup and get us unstuck and out of this mess. I looked over at my sister, who was taking long and deep breaths between her fingers. Are you all right? I asked. What do you think? She grumbled. I told you to slow down. Another jab, and this time I wasn't going to ave it. You want to be useful? I yelled. Get out there and push. No, then shut the hell up. I don't need it right now. She said nothing else, and neither did I, returning once again to the pocket of silence that our relationship succumbed to. The sooner Dad's headlights peaked in the distance, the better. Suddenly, she rolled the window down. What are you doing? I asked. SSSH. She pursed her lips. Just listen. Humoring her, I waited, and sure enough the sound reached me too. The quiet voice of a little girl coming from outside. Somebody, it whimpered. I'm lost. Please help me. I'm lost. My sister unlocked the door and motioned to open it. I grabbed her wrist. What are you doing? She snapped. There's someone out there. Just wait a second. It's weird, isn't it? The voice continued to whine, choking between sobs and pleading for someone, anyone, to help her. I didn't like the way it sounded, the same lasting drawl between words, the same weeping sounds, like someone was hitting repeat on a speaker. Something wasn't right, and my instincts were hoisting red flags left and right. Then my sister looked at me and her expression warped into shock. She flung back, pinning both shoulders against the interior. Things that sounded like words bubbled up, but didn't quite make it out of her throat. I turned and saw what. T was looking at me. It had the face of a man, surrounded by the mottled fur of a caribou's body. The skin was a mummified brown color, wound tightly around its long skull like old ankle leather. Snowflakes landed upon its white, expressionless eyes and melted into the dark membranes of its pupils. It circled the car, bobbing its antlers and fawning up the windows as it peered inside. My heart shook the walls of my throat. I locked eyes with my sister, unable to say anything behind the sheer disbelief. I should have grabbed my phone, snapped a photo, recorded a video, anything, but my thoughts were jangled. It then let out that same horrible scream, but I didn't see its tight, contorted lips open. The sound was coming from its neck, small, fleshy orifices, flapping open like mouths, were converting the high-pitched shrill into the mimic cry of a little girl. "Help me! I'm lost! Help me!" Headline. Tears glazed the area. My father's pickup came into view, paving its way down the path. The reindeer, or whatever the fuck it was, ran off, vanishing once again into the snow-covered thicket. Nobody believed us. YW. How if anybody had told me that story, I would have assumed they were hopped up on some crazy psychedelic. But the reality of what I saw was cold, and it's something I still, to this day, can't fully swallow. Instead of sleeping that night, my sister and I did some research that led us to the myth of skinwalkers, beings of some sort, capable of mimicking voices and disguising themselves as animals to lure people into the woods. After reading other accounts, there wasn't a doubt in my mind what we'd witnessed out there. Every so often that night, I'd tear out the window and the yard, wondering if I'd see that leathery face watching from the tree line. Neither I nor my sister ever made that trip again, much to the frustration of my family, but there was a silver lining. She and I have never been closer.